everyone. Welcome to another Author Chat Live with Pamunkey Regional Library. I am Kate, and the branch manager, one of the librarians at the Mechanicsville Branch Library. And today we have none other than Greer Macallister. Say hello, Greer.
Hello.
I'm really excited to bring Greer on with us because of the fact that most of my author chats have been with historical fiction writers. And while Greer certainly does check that box, the main focus of what we're talking about today is going to be this gorgeous, there it is right there, gorgeous new fantasy novel, Scorpica, that came out in February. But Greer, I know probably a lot of people don't actually know who you are. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Happy to. Usually I have all of my historical fiction books behind me, but I don't because I'm in a different location than usual. Instead, I have this sort of random group of foreign editions. I have like the Czech version of Women 99, which is really not going to help anybody figure me out, and the French version, and then Girl in Disguise. So I've been writing historical fiction since 2015. My historical novels include The Magician's Lie, Girl in Disguise, which is about the first female private detective, Kate Warren. Awesome. And trying to remember my own books now. Woman 99, which is about, inspired by Nellie Bly, about a young woman who tries to rescue her sister from a notorious insane asylum and finds it's easier to get in than it is to get out. And my latest historical novel from the very end of 2020, was The Arctic Fury. So, which is about 13 women who go north in search of the lost Franklin expedition and what happens when not all of them come back. So, when people asked me if I was always going to be a historical fiction writer, I said, yes, absolutely. The only ideas I ever get anymore are historical fiction ideas. And then lo and behold, one day it came along that I had an idea for a fantasy novel. So that is why I started writing the Five Queendoms series, the first novel of which I'm going to point in the wrong. There we go. Okay.
There you go. That's good.
Backwards. It's so weird. The first novel of which is Scorpica, which, as you said, came out in February. So it's a big change for me in some ways because I get to make stuff up. I was writing historical fiction, and obviously fiction is making stuff up. But in historical fiction, there are some things that you can make up and some things that you can't. And you will get angry emails from people if you get details wrong or if you change things that they think should not have been changed. So the great thing about fantasy is I made it up, so nobody can tell me that I did it wrong. And nobody can send me an email saying, well, you said that the Scorpicans were hunting conies in, the fall. And that's not when, those animals, migrate. I'm like, haha, yes, they do. Because I made them up. So so it's been really different in that way. The epic scope has been a lot to deal with because it's a whole bunch of different voices. It takes place over years and years. And it's at least a 3-book series, possibly a 5-book series. So I'm laying the groundwork in this first book for a bunch of things that aren't going to pay off for a long time, which is very different from writing a novel that just, starts on page 1 and you got to wrap everything up that you possibly can by the last page without making it be too neat and tidy, just the right amount of neat and tidy.
Now, do you normally, so when you write, what is actually your process? Are you a plotter or a pantser? I've heard that term.
Yes.
So what's actually your process? And, explain to us if your process has changed and evolved then from book 1, Magician's Lie, to now this epic fantasy that you have.
Yep. So my process is a mess. That has not changed. I've always been a mess. I will always continue to be a mess. But I did sort of hit a sweet spot in the middle. So The Magician's Lie, I was writing historical fiction for the first time. I didn't know how to do it. And I would write and then I would stop writing in order to research. And so I would need a hat in a scene and I would stop writing and go off in search of the perfect hat. And 3 hours later, I would have the perfect hat, but I would not have written a single word of the actual novel. And then I would end up deleting that scene like months later. So that took me 5 years to write The Magician's Lie and get it published. Then my next 2 Girl in Disguise and Woman 99 were both sold on proposal, and both took me almost exactly 2 years from the beginning of the idea to publication. So those were much, much faster because I came up with a strategy of do the big picture research, sort of who was Kate Warren and what cases did she work as a Pinkerton and what else were Pinkertons doing at the time and what happened, when she saved Abraham Lincoln's life en route to his inauguration and that sort of thing. Do the big picture research, sit down and write a draft. Don't touch any books or don't touch the internet while I was writing. And then go back at the end once I knew, because I would write things and then take them out, or my, agent or editor would have a really good suggestion like, oh, well, you don't need this character, or, this could be shorter or whatever. They would give me really good suggestions. I would go back and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And then I would go and do that final round of research where I would look at a map from 1850s Chicago and say, okay, well, if Kate Warren is walking down Adams Street and she goes 6 blocks and turns left, what street is she going to be on? Because you have to get those sorts of things. And I think with both historical fiction and now with epic fantasy, the selection of detail and the use of detail is super important because they're both world building in their own ways. So I don't want to overload the reader with too many details in either of those genres, but I want there to be enough detail that you can sort of get swept away. You can lose yourself in these stories because you can feel like you're there. So that's always my goal, regardless of genre. It's just a little bit different when it's talking about, 1850s Chicago versus this totally made up matriarchy that I invented where people are attacking each other with swords and magic and all sorts of fantasy stuff.
And what's funny is that I'm a self-proclaimed hisfic groupie. Okay, historical fiction is my realm. It's my world. I read book after book after book, and I go to sci-fi and fantasy kind of as my palate cleanser, right? Mm-hmm. But what's really funny is so much of society is reflected in fantasy, right? Mm-hmm. And your book, which people, I'm telling you, I read this book. There it is. I read it, and then at the end, I wanted to chuck it across the room because I was so mad that it ended. I wasn't ready for it to end. The only saving grace for the book was that I knew there was a book 2, so it did not get chucked across the room. But you chose the muses spoke with you in a certain way for this book. It is a matriarchal society, but I know that you went about the writing of this in a very different way, right? It's not men are evil and this is what happens when women rule the world type thing. So tell us a little bit more about the research and your pathway to this beautiful, beautiful book 2 needs to be out next week type thing.
I agree. The sooner the better.
Yes.
You've got to just do that thing for me. Yeah, I really wanted something that was sort of big and sprawling and Game of Thrones style, but focused on female characters and preferably set in a matriarchy, because I think it's really interesting to look at a world where just women have always been in charge, and that's the way it is. And it's not, like you said, it's not dystopian. It's not dystopian. It's not utopian. It's not, oh, the women are in charge and everything's great. Right. And it's not, oh, the women are in charge and now everything's worse than ever. It's just looking at power in a different way. And in traditional epic fantasy, there have always been female characters, obviously, in epic fantasy. Things like Lord of the Rings tend to be more male dominated, but there are female characters. But if you only have one female character, she's standing in for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And so if she's evil and all the men are nice, that says something. But if she's super lovely and wonderful and never has a bad thought about anybody, then that's sort of, also just sort of putting women in a box and saying, well, this is the only representative you've got. So she must be everybody. So I really just wanted to write something with basically dozens of female characters. And some of them are really sweet and wonderful and nurturing. and self-sacrificing. And some of them are absolutely terrible and like really, really bad people. And so I wanted to give these characters room to do all the things. And then just look at the more I started piecing the story together, the more I was thinking, well, now I've lost my train of thought. I'm not just trying to create suspense. I actually lost my train of thought. The more I thought, well, they wouldn't use the language that we use, and they wouldn't, look at things in the same way that we do. And it came down to like language, and, we say it was a group of men and women. And so they would say it's a group of women and men, because women always come first in this society because they're just used to that. And they wouldn't have sorcerers and sorceresses because you wouldn't have to feminize a role. You would just say the women and men are sorcerers, the women and men are gods, the women and men are priests. And it was actually really hard to go through the book because I was still saying like lioness and priestess and sorcerer many drafts into the book. So I really had to go back and look at my language. And then even the profanity that they use, the things you swear by in a society can be very telling. And so I had a lot of fun sort of shifting some.
There are a few zingers in there, that's for sure. Just a few. We won't say any of them, but there are good. There are a few good zingers. How did you come up? And this is the one thing that fantasy writers just, I mean, the limits to your imagination, there are none, basically. Names. How did you come up with names, right? You've got places, you've got people, I mean, where do you start with that?
The names of the people in particular, I wanted to hit a sweet spot of having unfamiliar names, but not like these long strings with apostrophes throughout them. It's
and I appreciate that.
Oh, look at ha for short. I wanted them to be unfamiliar but familiar, and I didn't want to draw. This is the huge difference between this book and my historical fiction. I wasn't drawing on a particular culture or a particular time and place. I was doing magpie research, and I was pulling stuff from societies that might have been matriarchal. The whole thing with the cities being built underground instead of from the ground up in Arca, which is a desert country, is based on an excavation that they did in a city that I totally cannot pronounce in Turkey. That was, it had natural caves, and then people built into the caves, and they built down into an underground city. And there was some theory that might have been a matriarchal society. So I'm like, ooh, I'm going to pull that in. I'm going to pull in this concept of walking marriage from the Mosuo of China. And I got to just sort of gather all that up. And in the same way, I wanted the names to not be Western European names, but not identifiably, like Naomi Novik pulls on, in Spinning Silvers, pulling on Polish. You're getting a lot of Russian stuff in Lieberger's Shadow and Bone series. There are people who are pulling from a specific place, and I didn't want it to be straight up European. So I sort of just started looking at the map and moving outward. And so there are Turkish names in there. There are Israeli names in there. There are Persian and stuff from Minoan Crete, like ancient Greek city-states and areas. And so I was really just trying to make sure that the names weren't all ending in A. There are some patterns where you'll see a lot of K's and KH's in Scorpican names. You'll see J's in Arcan names. The Paximite names tend to be the most like Greek and Roman derived. So there are some patterns, but I wasn't like super hardcore about like, oh, okay, well, I'm only going to have, Turkish names for this particular part of So I know that people who listen to the audiobook have no idea how any of these names are spelled. I find that's a problem when I listen to audiobooks too. I'm like, I did what Mars?
It's like, who knows?
Like
so irrelevant.
So,
so when the muse spoke to you about writing this book, how much did the muse tell you? Did the muse just say, you're going to do a matriarchal fantasy book, go? Or did the muse say, let's add some magic in this. Let's do a little, So where does that, did you feel from the beginning you needed to have magic in the book, or did that just kind of evolve as you started researching and plotting?
I definitely, the first spark of inspiration was just feminist Game of Thrones. Like, let's get the women out front and center. Let's have a big sprawling
Mm-hmm.
epic, which is easy to say. Like, oh yeah, it's going to be epic.
Yes.
But then the building of that world requires just countless hours of working through, like, what are the imports and exports of the different countries? And even if it's not on the page, I need to know it. And then it's going to unfold over the course of multiple books. The magic came fairly early on. I love fantasy books with a good magic system that isn't exactly like anything I've seen before. So this one, the interesting thing about the magic system in this is it really is sort of geographically located. It's really mostly just the women of Arca who have this. And it's not without its cost. You know, they have to be able to pull life force. They have to have sand near them. I didn't want anybody to be so magical that they could just snap their fingers and get whatever they want all the time. Cause that's
right.
Then you have a person who's too powerful and things get all thrown off. So, so I had to work through that. Magic came pretty early on. I thought about whether I wanted dragons. And I decided that I did not want dragons. So there will be some mystical creatures popping up in future books. I don't think they figured too heavily in this first one. But there will be some weird creatures that we don't have in modern society showing up.
That's later. And then, you know, again, naming those, like, you know, how do you name a creature?
Yes.
You know, without too many vowels and, you know, consonants and things like that. It's like, is Google going to be able to pronounce this when people are trying, you know, to figure it out? You know, so you said that you want it to be a 5-book series, but you've had, you know, book 1 is obviously sold and, you know, it's out in the world. Book 2, you know, you talked about. So with you knowing that you want 5 books, how challenging is it for you that you haven't sold 5 books yet?
It's challenging. And it's for book 2, it doesn't, hold on just a sec. Okay. My children are upstairs. Yeah, for book 2, it doesn't matter as much. Book 3 is when it's really going to make a difference. So whether book 3 is the end of a trilogy or whether book 3 is just the bridge to books 4 and 5, that's when the rubber's really going to hit the road. So I've been sort of pondering what different roads I can take to go one way or the other. But time will tell.
And I guess I should backtrack a little bit because maybe not everybody understands what I'm talking about. You have an idea for a book. You don't automatically then have a contract. So can you explain what we mean by that? You know, you need to get an agent and then tell us what the process is and why we know that there's 3 confirmed, but yet maybe not 5.
Right. And for me, the get an agent, get a publisher was even more complicated because I already had an agent who was selling my historical fiction to all of my, this historical fiction has come out from the same.
I got one. Wait. There we go.
Yes, all that historical fiction has come out from the same publisher, Source Books. And so my agent had a great ongoing relationship with Source Books and been able to sell those on proposal. But that agent doesn't represent fantasy. And so when I came up with a fantasy idea and I told her I was thinking about doing it, she's like, yes, go forth, do it. Let's figure it out. Because if it was sort of literary crossover, she could represent it. But then it turned out to be like straight up genre fantasy. And she said, you know what? You have my blessing. Go find an agent who will represent fantasy for you, and I will continue to represent your historical fiction. So a lot of people don't get that. And I was hugely, hugely lucky to be able to do that. And it turned out that one of the other agents who had offered on my first book in the intervening years has turned into a super powerhouse fantasy agent. So it worked out great that I was able to reach out to her and say, and I queried her, like, it's the same thing that anybody would do with trying to sell a book. You can't just call up agents and on the phone. Even in this case, even though it was somebody who had offered to represent me in the past, you can't just call them on the phone. You have to like frame out an email that says, here's me, here's my book. Would you like to read it? And if you love it, I'd love it if you represent me. So, so I sent the query letter. She read the book. She liked the book. And so we rewrote the contract so that I had those sort of two roads, like I talked about. Then the question was, okay, we're going to take this book / series to editors, and they would be willing to either just say, yes, we want to publish one book, or 2 books, or 3 books, or 5 books. And we got a number of offers from different publishers, but all of the publishers said, we're just going to do 3 for now. And then if it sells, frankly, right. If people seem to want more, then we will publish more. And then, so I get a certain amount of money for the 3 that are definitely under contract. And then, at a certain point in the process, we will go to the publisher and officially request, hey, we, really want to sell you books 4 and 5. Here's what they're going to be about. And then the publisher has to, thumbs up or thumbs down. And so I'm really hoping for a thumbs up, because there are 5 Queendoms and I'd really like there to be 5 books.
Would you ever consider self-publishing in order to get books 4 and 5 out on the market?
It's possible. I have thought about it. And I think the problem is just that book 3 is going to have to be so different. I can't really close off the trilogy. Book 3 is actually going to be, 400 pages long. Haha.
Oh, great. Do it.
Sneaky. So I'll have to sort of take a fork in the road. And then I'm also, I want to continue publishing historical novels. So I only have so much time in the day. With so many other things going on also in my life. So, maybe fantasy takes a backseat for a while and I do a couple of historical novels. Maybe I do both simultaneously. It just kind of depends on whether the readers embrace it and want more of it.
Now, you're a big, there we go. You're a big blogger. And you actually posted a blog this year about writing every day for like a month.
Oh, yeah.
So do you normally write every day, or do you just kind of write when inspiration hits? Or is it just dependent upon like what deadlines you have?
It's really where I am in the process. And I resist a lot of the common writing advice, because I think there's just no one size fits all. Like everybody's different. And so I don't generally write every day. And so it was sort of an experiment for me to try writing every day. And some days it was more successful than others. And then I've been in a period where I don't have a deadline and I can go 2 weeks or 3 weeks without writing anything other than, I guess the problem is everything's writing, like the blog posts are writing and the, Twitter is even writing. It's just really short writing.
And you're very active on social media too. So, I mean, that's very time consuming.
Yes. I do it because it's fun, mostly, but also it's helpful. I want to be in front of more people. Definitely. So it's not something that, my publisher doesn't say, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z on Instagram and Twitter and whatnot. But I feel like I'm connecting with readers on these different platforms. So I enjoy it.
And the thing with that too is it's been so hard to connect with readers, right? Especially, Arctic Fury published December of 2020. Hello, 2020. We were all a little bit busy doing, hibernating things. So, social media was basically where it's at. Virtual events. I've been lucky enough to have numerous author chats to be able to introduce readers to authors whom they might never have had the chance to be introduced to talk to experience a one-on-one. And that really, I think, is the beauty of virtual. I mean, yes, I think to a certain degree, we're all getting zoomed out, but, at the same point, again, libraries can't always afford to pay authors for trips, right? So I think this is a good balance. One of the key things that I noticed when you published Scorpica is that you used a pen name. Was that by choice? Was that by design? Was that your agent telling you do this to kind of differentiate between the contracts? What was that decision based on?
It was totally my choice. I suggested it and the agent agreed with it and the publisher agreed with it, just so that, because I do have these 2 different genres going on, I want, some readers love both. Some readers are totally going to embrace both. They like stories about strong women. They can read either my epic fantasy or my historical fiction. But I have a lot of friends who read historical fiction who don't want
Right.
fantasy, and they
Right.
politely nod and say, you know, that's great that you're doing that. Tell me when your next historical novel is out. And I have bookstores that say that and libraries that say that. It's not just individual people. Bookstores and libraries know their patrons and they know their readers and they know what they have a readership for. So I wanted to make it really easy for somebody to look at one of my books and say, oh, this is one of her historical novels. Oh, this is one of her fantasy novels. And I feel like with fantasy, it is just kind of a thing to use your initials. And so I decided to go with, okay, G.R. Macallister is the fantasy name. And it's a pseudonym, but it's kind of like obvious.
It is, yeah.
But it's me. I didn't go with a completely different identity. My social media accounts are for both.
Right.
Don't have separate accounts for GR and for Greer. So people, are sort of hearing about things on both sides of the fence, but it's a separate identity for sales numbers and for the readers who only want fantasy or only want historical fiction, or at least want to know which one I'm coming at them with next.
Now, as a writer of both historical fiction and now fantasy, what do you actually gravitate towards when you want to read?
I read everything. I read romance. I read nonfiction. I do read a lot of historical fiction and have, just because I feel like you probably shouldn't be writing in a genre if you don't know what's out there in those genres. And I was really playing catch up with fantasy. Let's see, when I started writing this in 2018, I think, or 2019. But I hadn't read fantasy in a long time. Like when I got this idea, I read fantasy a lot when I was younger. I played Dungeons and Dragons in high school. Like I was a fantasy kid, but I sort of drifted away from it as I got older. And I had missed just so much really cool stuff. N.K. Jemisin and just a big difference from what the male-dominated all European fantasy was when I was growing up. So I really wanted to catch up with what had been going on and then the really current stuff. So I'm reading, Rebecca Roanhurst has a new book out today called Fevered Star. It's the second in her series that started with Black Sun. It's absolutely amazing. It's based on the pre-Columbian civilizations of Latin and South America. So it's just, there's so much cool stuff happening in fantasy, if you like fantasy. So I kind of have, I have my, in my phone with my but I get Overdrive from my library, and I've always got sort of a cascade of different things going on, like one romance to read at night before I go to bed, and one historical novel. Maybe I'm doing an event with somebody, like Heather Webb's book, The Next Ship Home. Actually, that I was listening to on Libro. I got that one as an audiobook. So sort of the good thing is I enjoy reading all this stuff because it's sort of for work, but it's sort of for fun. Most of what I read. And then I'm reading Verb and all that.
Well, that's the, people don't realize that when you're an author and then when you become like a very well-known author or, accomplished author, you're then asked to do things like blurb for other books.
So many things. Ooh. I don't know if I'm still on and we lost Kate, maybe. Checking to see if there are any comments here. Well, hopefully we get Kate back. If anybody else wants to ask questions, we can you can type your comments in the comment zone over here. Oh, it's just me for now, but I think Kate will hopefully be coming back soon. Well, one of the things Kate had asked that I do is read a little bit from the prologue of Scorpica. So now seems like probably a really good time to do that. So this is Scorpica. It is an epic fantasy set in a matriarchal society called the Five Queendoms. And I think we're about to get Kate back.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Not quite sure what happened, but I'm back. So, and it looks like my lighting is better, so that's pretty amazing. So there you go. See, it was the benefit.
I was about to start reading from the book. I wasn't sure what to do.
Winner, right? Again, apologize for that. Computer difficulties seem to be our luck lately. But I just got off track. So we were talking about book blurbing and how do you have a family. We talked about you don't necessarily write every day, but how do you fit it in? I have an 8-hour job. I go home and I'm tired. I don't want to do anything else, right? I might read, I might play a little video game, I might watch a little TV, but luckily my kids are grown and out of the house. How do you function? How do you balance it all? And where do you find the time?
Very poorly.
Very poorly. I doubt that.
It's got to be an Abner Flow, right? There are times where I'm driving toward a deadline and I just my husband takes the kids for the weekend and I go to a hotel and I do nothing but write for 3 days. There are those times. And then there are oh, my kid's birthday party is coming up and I got to deal with this. So, writing will have to wait, or I'll take on fewer things like blurbing. Cause that's something that I love to do it. It's really, I love to get an early look at books and I enjoy doing that for authors who are trying to break in the way that when I was trying to break in, people were doing it for me. But if I get into a tough spot and I know that I've got a book due in 3 months, I will say, yes, go ahead and send it to me, but I probably won't be able to read it. And so sometimes I get to it and sometimes I don't, but I have to be able to turn up and turn down certain levers, and call on my squad of babysitters and have them, take over bedtime and while I'm trying to crank out,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can't, I mean, my husband was military, as people who have heard me before. So, I did the raising the kids while he was gone, oh, wait, I'm going to go to school full time too, because why not? I've got nothing else to do. But again, it's a balance, right? And we all have to find those ways. Have you reached the level of success that you've wanted to in your writing career?
I mean, yes and no. I will always want to be a New York Times bestseller. I will always want to be one of those people that, just the book zooms to the top of the bestseller list.
Sure.
The Kate Quinns of the world, right? Everybody wants to be Kate Quinn, for good reason. But all I really need is for a book to do well enough that a publisher will buy the next book. So as long as I get to keep writing and publishers will pay me for it and get my books into the hands of readers, that's the kind of success that I need. And that's the kind of success that I have. So far, every time that I've come up with, even when I came up with this wild idea of writing a fantasy series instead of the historical fiction bread and butter that people have come to know and love. Even when I did that and went off in this wacky direction, I still, was successful in finding a publisher who would pay me for those books and get them out into the hands of readers.
And so you didn't just you weren't born a novelist, but
right.
You were almost, in a sense, born a writer, because you did write before. So, from being, I think I've read that you were a poet and a short story writer. What made you want to evolve?
I think partly it's you climb the mountain because it's there. Writing short stories.
Oh, of course.
Is wonderful.
Let's go to Everest, next weekend.
But I don't climb actual mountains. Let's be
okay.
The mountain can be there and just be there and look pretty.
We'll leave that for Stephanie Thornton.
But I really, writing short stories is great, and it's its own self-contained thing. And I think there are people who are only short story writers and only want to be short story writers. But for me, it sort of created this hunger to do more and to write more and to tell bigger stories. And some stories lend themselves to, each of these different forms. And when I was in an MFA workshop, got my MFA at American University, and you had to take a creative writing workshop every semester, but it didn't have to always be in the same genre. So I was taking fiction writing, but I would also switch it up sometimes and do poetry, or there was a playwriting class that was co-sponsored by the drama department and the writing department. And so it was half actors and half writers. And so we would write stuff and then bring it to class to act. And that is amazing training for dialogue, because watching people try to speak your words, and if they can't, like if they just can't follow it, or they speak it and you're like, oh my gosh, that doesn't sound like something a normal person would say. It's really this wonderful real-time lab. So I learned so much by writing in all of these different genres that I just wanted to do more and grow more. But I feel like novels are really my strength versus playwriting. I had a play performed at AU, and the last night, the actress who had the last line decided to add her own last line to my play. And I'm like, nope, I'm out. Done with that. No more plays for me. Because in novels, I tell the characters what to say and they say it. So.
Except when they're rogue and they tell you what they want to say. Because I've heard writers say that too. Like they say, no, I want to act this way.
Right.
Which of course with your fantasy, they can do that because they're not scripted, by historical events.
Right.
What's next in the pipeline for some of your novels? Are any of them contracted for big screen, small screen, streaming, or are any of them ready for the next phase?
They have been, several have been optioned. So The Magician's Lie was optioned for film by Jessica Chastain's company, Freckle Films, but that option has expired. So now she could come back and say, yes, I want to do it after all, or somebody else could buy it and say, I'm going to develop this. Girl in Disguise has not been optioned. There is a Kate Warren movie coming from Amazon starring Emily Blunt. But they did not ask if they could option my book. So I'm going to be watching closely and make sure they don't use any of the events in my book that are made up and not from the historical record. So that one has not been optioned. Woman 99 is probably the closest to come, because that's been optioned by Bruna Papandreou's Made Up Stories company. They're the ones that did Big Little Lies. They optioned it, and Nina Dobrev is contracted to play the lead, and she's also one of the executive producers. So whenever she has time, which I imagine she doesn't have much of because she's pretty like acting, but when she has time, that's the one that I think is most likely to make it to an actual screen, in the world, which would be so crazy.
Party at Greer's house, yes. Love that. What drives you to keep going? I mean, as moms, obviously our kids, they're pretty good inspiration, but what keeps you going?
I feel like there's always more stories to tell. I mean, there have been some lows in my writing career, like when I thought The Magician's Lie wasn't going to find a publisher. And I had been working on it, and I thought it was ready to send to publishers, and I was 7 months pregnant. And my agent said, no, it's not ready to send to publishers yet, which meant that it wasn't going to be ready until after my first child was born. And I'm like, that's it. Maybe I give up writing. Maybe I just stop. If I work this hard and it doesn't go anywhere, maybe I just stop. And that lasted about 24 hours. Then I was like, oh yeah, no, I have to keep writing. I have to see where the story is going. I have to get it out there to the world. And so I kept going. And with the fantasy series, like I want to get back into this world, and I want all of the people who, are mad about the decision that a certain character made at the end of this book.
Again, wanted to throw the book.
Yes. I want to show people where it's going. And then there's like a character who is mentioned in here and then just disappears entirely. And I've had a number of people be like, are we going to find out about her? And I'm like, yes, you are going to find out about her. So I want the books to keep coming. I want to keep telling those stories.
And we appreciate that, because there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse when somebody says, oh, I've got this great series and here's book one. Okay, you read book one, you fall in love with book one, and you just start salivating for more. And then it never comes. And it's like, why did I invest my heart and soul into book one? And then you're going to divorce me and dump me like right at the street. So, you know, for readers, it's as writers and readers both, like we all want to have that emotional response, right? You want to feel vested in the story. You want to have that type of relationship. But yet I can understand as a writer, you've got so many different things pulling you. And just because a reader wants book two, that doesn't mean a publisher wants book two. So, you know, that's hard, I think, for readers to understand that writers also feel that too, you know?
Yeah. And all sorts of things happen. I mean, you know, even if I hit my deadlines and I give a book to the publisher every year, they may not be able to publish it. Like it's supposed to be, you know, turning in books 3 Octobers in a row and having books come out 3 Februarys in a row. But pandemic, pandemic, who knows? Books, there was, you probably heard about this. There were a couple of different books that they were being shipped. I think of like Melissa Clark's new cookbook was being shipped, where it had been printed in China or whatever, shipped, and like something happened, and then like it just, all of the pallets of the book just slid off the ship and fell in the ocean. So her book's not coming out when it was supposed to because books fell in the ocean. And that's just the kind of thing that happens in publishing these days. So you gotta be prepared for that. So the counterexample to that, though, is you hear people saying, well, I don't want to read book one until the series is complete because I want to only read complete series. Well, if nobody reads book one, the publisher is not going to buy books, you know, the next few books.
Right.
So you got to kind of balance it. And it's kind of like with TV shows, right? Like, oh, I don't want to get hooked on this TV show if it's going to go away.
Yes.
But if nobody watches the TV show, if everybody just waits till it comes out on Netflix, then it's, you know, probably not going to be a very long-lived series.
Binging definitely changed the TV world, I think, for that at least.
For sure.
And I think you're right. You know, now that people don't necessarily have to wait their turn in line at the library, when they can have instant gratification by purchasing it online or by using Hoopla or another app. I think you're right in that it changes people's perspective about what they're going to read and when they're going to read it. I, for one, think that you're right in that your series will take off more once book two is out there. But I mean, honestly, like for me, I was thrown away by this book. It's so descriptive. The characters are just, they're so unique. They're so unique. They don't, you know, you might have had an underlying, oh, this person's going to be a little bit like, you know, whoever of this society, but yet I didn't feel that really as I read through the book. And one of the things that I noted that you didn't do in this book, there are no discussion questions at the end of this book.
Oh, okay.
So
maybe they'll do it in the paperback, or maybe it's on the website. I feel like I did some discussion questions. Right. I don't think there are any in there.
So they're not in the hardcover. So maybe they're being saved for the.
Nope, just the acknowledgements. Nope.
Maybe they're being saved for the paperback release. Who knows? But I found that interesting because I think that the characters, they're not one-dimensional. And I think as a writer that says a lot about the quality that you wanted to produce, because, oh my gosh, some of these characters, you just feel everything. You know, it's like the sands of time, right? It's just a magnificent story. And with that being said, you and I had discussed possibly a little bit of a reading.
Yeah.
So if you're up for it, let's go ahead and read that short little bit, and let's see if we can entice people to come to the library or go to the bookstore.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
So if I read the whole, it's just 2 pages. It'll probably be about like 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah, we've
Wanna
got
do
plenty of time. So
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't say prologue at the top because there are people who
It
won't
does
read
not.
prologues.
I know.
It comes before.
It's
chapter 1.
before. See, what's funny is that when you and I were chatting, I was like prologue in quotation marks because
Yeah.
it's not the prologue, but you knew
It's not
exactly
a
what I was
prologue.
talking
It comes
about.
before everything else, and it's very short. All right. So this is the first page. Across the 5 queendoms of the known world, on an average day, roughly 100 children were born. They rushed headlong from between the thighs of warriors and shepherds, farmers and courtiers, scribes and healers, thieves and queens. Some days brought more, some days fewer, but over weeks and months and years, the newborns announced themselves in a constant cascade, squalling into life. The 5 queendoms were the 5 fingers of a hand, crucially connected but distinct. Since the Great Peace had defined their borders 500 years before, generations had known only harmony between the queendoms. The women who crafted the peace drew the maps wisely. Each nation had its gifts, its role. The scribes of the bastion kept impeccable records and educated the most talented intellects of every queendom. Cestia was rich with grain and sheep. The desert of Arca grew only one thing, but that thing was magic, and it was enough. Paxum brokered the deals. The wheels of countless trade wagons wore ruts across its soil in every direction. And Scorpica had the strongest fighters, every woman a warrior, their commander, their queen. The balance seemed elegant, eternal, as solid underfoot as a natural stone bridge carved by water and time. Then one unnatural shift broke it open. Peace was not as solid as it had seemed. Late on the 4th day of the 4th month of the All-Mother's year 502, the day a headstrong kingling was born to the widowed queen of Paxum, 4 girls were among the world's newborns. One was the daughter of a warrior queen, another of a disgraced priest, yet another the offspring of a healer at the end of her line. One, born orphan as her mother's spirit left the world, was no one's daughter but the country's. At first, they seemed ordinary. If the next days had brought more girls like them, they would have been. But the following day, every child born to the women of Paxum, senators to servants, was a boy. The same was true in the tents of the Scorpican warriors, among the magicians of Arca, on Cestia's lush, sprawling farms, in the narrow stone fortress of the Bastion. All across the 5 queendoms, what happened was the same. Infants were born squalling and silent, rich and poor, hale and weak, welcomed and unwanted. Their unfocused eyes looked out over bleak desert, rich green pasture, hilly wildwoods, impervious stone. They were gifts and they were accidents. They were blessed with excess and cursed with want. They were the ambassadors of future generations, hope made visible, swaddled in bundles of padded, wrinkling flesh. They were all things to all women, except that not one of them was a girl. Years would pass before another girl was born anywhere in the 5 queendoms. More years would pass before anyone truly understood why.
Everybody, go run out, get this book. Come to the library, check it out. Greer, thank you not only for coming online tonight, but for writing this book. I loved it. I don't reread books, but I think I might actually reread this book because I loved it so much. And it's just
while you're waiting for book number 2.
I will have to, yes. It's escapism for me, and I think everybody can use a touch of escapism these days, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight on tonight's author chat. Greer, again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you maybe again soon. Who knows?
Hope so.
But,
all right,
everyone, take care.
Bye.